My name is Beverly, and I'm 54 years old. This morning, I woke up thinking it would be the most beautiful day of my life. My daughter Sarah was getting married, and after 28 years of being her mother, I thought I'd finally get to see her walk down the aisle as a radiant bride. I had sacrificed so much for this moment, working 2 jobs, skipping promotions, putting her needs before mine since her father and I divorced 8 years ago. But sometimes the people we love the most can surprise us in ways we never expect. Before I share what happened just hours before Sarah's wedding ceremony, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life stories. Trust me, this story will make you think twice about family relationships and what unconditional love really means. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs much earlier. 8 years ago, when Tom and I divorced, I made a promise to myself that Sarah would never suffer because of our failed marriage. She was only 20 then, just starting college with dreams of becoming an accountant. I took on extra shifts at the diner where I worked, picked up weekend cleaning jobs, and even sold my grandmother's jewellery to pay for her tuition. Every sacrifice felt worth it when I saw her graduate summa cum laude 4 years later. Sarah landed a great job at a prestigious accounting firm downtown. I was so proud watching her in her professional clothes, carrying herself with such confidence. We had dinner together every Sunday at my little apartment, and she'd tell me about her work, her colleagues, her dreams of buying her own place someday. Those Sunday dinners were my favourite part of the week, just the 2 of us sharing stories and laughing like best friends. When Sarah turned 25, she started dating David, a lawyer from a prominent family. At first, I was thrilled she'd found someone who made her happy. She'd light up whenever she talked about him, describing their fancy dinner dates and weekend trips to his family's lake house. I encouraged the relationship, even though I noticed she started missing our Sunday dinners more frequently. "I'm just busy with David's family events," she'd explain. "You understand, right, Mum?" I did understand, or at least I tried to. When you're young and in love, your priorities shift. I remembered feeling the same way about Tom when we first met. Sarah deserved to experience that happiness, that excitement of new love. Even when weeks passed between our conversations, I told myself this was natural. She was growing up, building her own life, and that's exactly what I'd raised her to do. The announcement of their engagement came during one of our rare dinners together. Sarah's eyes sparkled as she showed me the enormous diamond ring David had given her. "Mum, we're thinking about a spring wedding," she said, practically bouncing in her seat. I hugged her tight, tears of joy streaming down my face. My little girl was going to be a bride. All those years of working multiple jobs, all those nights, I fell asleep exhausted, suddenly felt like they had led to this perfect moment. The first crack in our relationship appeared during the engagement dinner party at David's family estate. I had bought a new dress, something modest but elegant from the department store, where I occasionally shopped during sales. Walking into their grand dining room with crystal chandeliers and oil paintings, I felt completely out of place, but I was determined to make a good impression. Margaret, David's mother, greeted me with a cold smile that never reached her eyes. She was tall, impeccably dressed in what I later learned was a designer suit worth more than my monthly salary. "Beverly, how nice to finally meet you," she said, looking me up and down with barely concealed disdain. "Sarah has told us so much about your work at the diner." The way she said diner made it sound like something shameful. I straightened my shoulders and smiled back. "I've worked hard to provide for Sarah. She's accomplished so much." "Yes, well, David's family believes in supporting their children too," Margaret replied smoothly. "Of course, we've been fortunate enough to do so without requiring Sarah to take on student loans or work during college." I felt heat rise to my cheeks, but before I could respond, Sarah appeared at my side. Instead of defending me or changing the subject, she actually seemed embarrassed. "Mum, Margaret was just telling me about the country club where they're thinking of having the reception. Sarah said quickly. Isn't that exciting? Throughout dinner, Margaret continued her subtle attacks. When I mentioned my pride in working my way up to shift supervisor at the diner, she smiled condescendingly and said, "How admirable. David's father always says honest work builds character." When I asked about wedding planning, she exchanged a look with Sarah and replied, "Oh, we'll handle all the important details. These things require a certain level of experience and sophistication." What hurt most was watching Sarah nod in agreement. My daughter, whom I'd raised to be strong and independent, was sitting there allowing this woman to diminish everything I'd done for her. When Margaret suggested I might feel more comfortable helping with simple tasks rather than major decisions, Sarah actually said, "That's probably best, Mum. Margaret understands these high-end events better than we do." I drove home that night with tears blurring my vision, feeling like I'd lost my daughter to people who saw me as beneath them. The girl who used to defend me against playground bullies was now too ashamed to stand up for me in front of her future in-laws. Over the following months, I tried desperately to remain involved in Sarah's wedding planning, but every attempt was met with polite dismissal. When I offered to help choose flowers, Sarah told me Margaret had already arranged everything with her personal florist. When I suggested we shop for her wedding dress together, like I'd always dreamed we would, Sarah explained that Margaret was taking her to an exclusive bridal salon where I wouldn't feel comfortable. "The dresses there cost more than you make in 6 months, Mum," Sarah said, matter-of-factly during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. "I don't want you to feel awkward." I swallowed my hurt and offered to pay for whatever I could afford. Maybe I couldn't buy her a $5,000 dress, but I'd saved up $3,000 specifically for wedding expenses. Sarah's response cut deeper than any blade. "That's sweet, but Margaret's already covering everything. She says it's what David's family does for their children." The final blow came when we discussed who would walk Sarah down the aisle. I had always assumed it would be me since I'd been both mother and father to her for most of her life. But Sarah informed me that Tom, her father, who'd missed every important milestone, would have that honour. "Dad's been trying to reconnect," Sarah explained, as if 8 years of minimal contact could be erased by a few awkward coffee meetings. "Margaret thinks it would look better for the photos if a man walks me down the aisle. You know, more traditional." "More traditional?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, I'm the one who raised you. I'm the one who was there for every scraped knee, every broken heart, every triumph." "I know that, Mum," Sarah said, but her tone suggested she was already mentally moving on from the conversation. "You can still have a special role. Margaret suggested you could do one of the readings during the ceremony." A reading. After 28 years of being her everything, I was being offered the chance to read a few Bible verses at my daughter's wedding. That night, I called my sister Linda and cried until I had no tears left. "Beverly, this is insane," Linda said, her voice shaking with anger. "That girl has lost her mind, and that Margaret woman sounds like a manipulative witch. She's just young and in love." I found myself defending Sarah even as my heart was breaking. "She wants to fit in with David's family. I can understand that." "Understanding and accepting are 2 different things," Linda replied firmly. "You raised that girl to be better than this. Don't you dare make excuses for her treating you like garbage." Despite Linda's words, I couldn't bring myself to confront Sarah. This was her wedding, her special day. I told myself I could endure anything for her happiness, even if it meant swallowing my pride and accepting a backseat role in the most important day of her life. But Margaret wasn't finished with her campaign to erase me from the celebration. 2 weeks before the wedding, Sarah called to tell me there had been a small change in the seating arrangements. "Margaret thinks it would be better if her side of the family sits in the front rows," Sarah explained casually. "You know, since they're hosting and paying for everything, you'll be in the 3rd row, which is still really close." The 3rd row. At my own daughter's wedding, I would be sitting behind people I'd never met, watching strangers occupy the seats that should have been reserved for the family who actually raised the bride. The morning of Sarah's wedding arrived grey and drizzly, which felt appropriate for my mood. I woke up at 5 a.m. too anxious to sleep any longer. Despite everything that had happened, despite feeling like an unwelcome guest at my own daughter's celebration, I was determined to look my absolute best. This was still my little girl's wedding day. I had splurged on a beautiful navy blue suit that cost me half a month's salary. It wasn't designer like what Margaret would be wearing, but it was elegant and made me feel confident. I spent an hour styling my hair, something I rarely had time to do properly, and applied makeup with care. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman who had worked hard for everything. She had a mother who deserved respect and love. By 10 a.m., I was ready to head over to Sarah's apartment to help her prepare for the ceremony. I had bought a small gift for her to open before the wedding, a delicate gold necklace that had belonged to my mother. It wasn't expensive, but it carried decades of family history and love. When I arrived at Sarah's place, I found the front door slightly open. Margaret's voice drifted out sharp and commanding as she directed preparations. I knocked gently and entered to find the living room transformed into a bridal preparation station, with mirrors, makeup cases, and flower arrangements everywhere. Sarah stood in the centre of it all, wearing a silk robe, her hair already styled in an elaborate updo that must have taken hours to create. She looked absolutely stunning, like a princess from a fairy tale. For a moment, my heart swelled with the old familiar pride and love. "Mum," Sarah said, when she noticed me, but her tone was flat, almost cold. "You're early. I wanted to help you get ready," I replied, holding up the small gift bag. "I brought something for you." Margaret appeared from the kitchen, dressed immaculately despite the early hour. She looked at me as if I were an uninvited party crasher. "Beverly, we actually have everything under control here. The photographer will be arriving soon for pre-ceremony shots." I felt awkward, but tried to push forward. "Of course, I just thought maybe I could help with anything you need, sweetheart," I said to Sarah. "This is such an exciting day." Sarah exchanged a glance with Margaret, one of those wordless communications that excluded me completely. "Actually, Mum," Sarah began, wrapping her robe tighter around herself, "Margaret has been handling all the preparations. We've got a very specific schedule to follow." I watched as Margaret moved efficiently around the room, adjusting flowers, checking details, acting like the mother of the bride, while I stood there feeling useless and out of place. Every suggestion I made was politely declined. Every offer to help was redirected to Margaret's superior knowledge and experience. As the morning progressed, I realized I was essentially an observer at my own daughter's wedding preparation. Margaret knew exactly which makeup artist was coming, which photographer had which shots planned, which flowers needed to be pinned where. I knew nothing about any of it because I had been systematically excluded from every decision. Around 11 a.m., Margaret pulled Sarah aside for a whispered conversation near the bedroom door. I couldn't hear the exact words, but I caught fragments: complications, unnecessary stress, and perfect day. Sarah kept glancing at me during their discussion, and I felt a growing sense of unease. When they finished talking, Sarah walked toward me with a strange expression on her face. Nervous, but determined, she gestured for me to step outside onto her small balcony, away from Margaret and the bustling preparations. "Mum, we need to talk," Sarah said, closing the sliding door behind us. Standing there in her silk robe with her perfect hair and makeup, my daughter looked like a stranger. The girl who used to run to me for comfort and advice was looking at me like I was a problem to be solved. "Sarah, sweetheart, what's wrong?" I asked, though I was already dreading her answer. She took a deep breath, avoiding my eyes. "Mum, I've been thinking and Margaret has some concerns. Maybe it would be better if you didn't come to the ceremony today." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't comprehend what I had just heard. "What did you just say?" "I know it sounds terrible," Sarah continued quickly, still not meeting my gaze. "But Margaret is worried about potential drama. She thinks having you there might create unnecessary tension, and I just want this day to be perfect. Drama, I repeated, my voice coming out as a whisper. Sarah, I'm your mother. What drama could I possibly create by attending your wedding? You know how you get emotional at big events, Sarah said, finally looking at me. Her eyes were cold, distant, like she was talking to a difficult acquaintance rather than the woman who had raised her. Margaret thinks it might be better for everyone if you just stayed home today. I stared at my daughter, this beautiful young woman I had sacrificed everything for, and felt something break inside my chest. Sarah, I raised you by myself. I worked 3 jobs to put you through college. I've been there for every important moment of your life, and now you're telling me I can't be there for the most important day. I know you've done a lot for me, Sarah replied, her tone suggesting she was stating facts rather than expressing gratitude. But this is my wedding day. I want it to be perfect, and having family tension would just ruin everything. Family tension? I asked, my voice growing stronger as shock gave way to hurt and then anger. The only tension here is what Margaret has created. Sarah, don't you see what she's doing? She's systematically removed me from every aspect of your wedding. Sarah's expression hardened. Margaret has been nothing but helpful. She's given me the wedding of my dreams, something I could never have afforded otherwise. The least I can do is respect her wishes about keeping things peaceful. In that moment, looking at my daughter's face, I realized that the little girl who used to think I hung the moon was gone. In her place stood a young woman who valued wealth and social status over the love and sacrifice that had shaped her entire life. So, this is it, I asked quietly. After everything we've been through together, you're choosing Margaret over me. I'm choosing my future, Sarah replied, lifting her chin defiantly. David's family can give me things you never could, Mum. This is my chance to have a better life. Those words, delivered with such casual cruelty, shattered the last of my illusions about our relationship. I looked at Sarah for a long moment, memorizing her face, knowing that no matter what happened after this day, things between us would never be the same. Okay, I said simply. Sarah blinked, clearly surprised by my calm response. Okay, I repeated, turning toward the sliding door. If that's what you want, then that's what you'll get. I walked back through her apartment past Margaret, who was pretending not to eavesdrop past all the wedding preparations that I would never see in use. At the front door, I turned back one last time. Sarah was standing in the doorway to the balcony, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. For just a moment, she looked like my little girl again, uncertain and maybe even a little scared. But then Margaret appeared beside her, placing a possessive hand on Sarah's shoulder, and the moment passed. I walked out of my daughter's apartment and closed the door quietly behind me. The drive home felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream where everything looked familiar, but nothing made sense. I found myself stopping at red lights and forgetting what I was supposed to do when they turned green. Other drivers honked at me, but their irritation felt distant and unimportant compared to the strange numbness spreading through my chest. When I finally reached my apartment, I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, staring at the building where I'd lived alone for the past 8 years. Everything looked exactly the same as it had when I'd left that morning, full of hope and excitement, but I felt like a completely different person. Inside my apartment, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. I was still wearing the expensive navy suit, my hair was still perfectly styled, my makeup was still flawless. I looked like a woman dressed for a celebration, but there would be no celebration for me today. I walked into my bedroom and carefully removed the suit, hanging it back in the closet, where it would probably remain unworn for years. I peeled off the pantyhose that had been cutting into my waist all morning, washed off the makeup I'd applied so carefully, and brushed out my hair until it fell naturally around my shoulders. Standing in my underwear in front of my dresser, I realized I had no idea what to do with the rest of my day. I had planned to be at a wedding celebrating my daughter's happiness, dancing at the reception, maybe even giving a tearful mother of the bride speech. Instead, I was alone in my bedroom, uninvited and unwanted. The phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. For a moment, my heart leaped, thinking maybe Sarah had realized her mistake and was calling to apologize. But when I checked the caller ID, it was Linda. "Beverly, how's the wedding preparation going?" Linda asked cheerfully. "Is our girl ready for her big day?" I sank onto the edge of my bed, suddenly exhausted. "Linda, I'm not going to the wedding." "What? Why not? Are you sick?" "Sarah uninvited me." I said the words, sounding impossible even as they left my mouth. Margaret convinced her that I would cause drama, so Sarah asked me not to come. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Linda exploded. "She did. What? Beverly, tell me you're joking. Tell me my niece did not just uninvite her own mother from her wedding." "She did," I confirmed, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "About an hour ago, she said she wanted the day to be perfect." "Perfect?" Linda's voice rose to a pitch that probably frightened her neighbours. "That little ungrateful brat thinks her day will be more perfect without the woman who sacrificed everything for her Beverly. You need to get down there and give her a piece of your mind. You need to tell her exactly what you think of her and that witch Margaret." "No," I said firmly. "If that's what Sarah wants, then that's what she'll get." "Beverly Ann, don't you dare take this lying down," Linda said, using my full name like she had when we were children. "You have every right to be at that wedding. You're her mother." "Being someone's mother doesn't guarantee anything," I replied, pulling on a comfortable pair of jeans and a soft sweater. "I've learned that today." After I hung up with Linda, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen table trying to process what had just happened. Part of me kept expecting to wake up and discover this was all a terrible nightmare. But the coffee was real, the silence in my apartment was real, and the absence of wedding preparations around me was very, very real. I thought about calling Sarah back, maybe trying to reason with her one more time. I could beg, I could plead, I could promise to sit quietly in the back and not cause any of the mysterious drama she was so worried about. But even as the thoughts crossed my mind, I knew I wouldn't do it. I had more pride than that, and more importantly, I was starting to realize I deserved better. For the first time in 28 years, I had an entire Saturday with no obligations, no one depending on me, no one needing anything from me. The freedom felt strange and a little frightening, but also oddly exhilarating. I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I went shopping for myself. Not shopping for work clothes or household necessities or gifts for Sarah, but actual shopping for things I wanted. I drove to the mall and wandered through stores I'd only glanced at in passing, the ones with beautiful clothes I'd always assumed were too expensive for someone like me. In a boutique that smelled like expensive perfume, I found a gorgeous emerald green dress that made my eyes look bright and mysterious. It cost $200 money I would normally have saved or spent on Sarah, but today I bought it without hesitation. I also bought matching shoes, a delicate silver bracelet, and a bottle of the perfume that had caught my attention when I walked in. At the grocery store, I filled my cart with ingredients for an elaborate dinner, the kind I used to make when I had time and energy to cook for pleasure rather than necessity. Salmon fillets, fresh asparagus, baby potatoes, a bottle of wine that cost more than I usually spent on groceries in a week. Back home, I spent the afternoon cooking slowly and mindfully, tasting as I went, adjusting seasonings, taking my time with each step. I set my small dining table with my good china, the set my mother had given me that I'd been saving for special occasions. I lit candles, opened the wine, and prepared to have dinner with the most important person in my life, myself. As I sat down to eat my beautiful meal in my quiet apartment, I realized something had shifted inside me. The devastating hurt was still there, but underneath it was something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of my own worth. that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or gratitude. I turned off my phone and spent the evening reading a novel I'd started months ago but never had time to finish. I took a long bath with the expensive bath salts I'd been saving. I painted my nails a bold red colour I'd always admired but never dared to wear. For the first time in decades, I went to bed early, not because I was exhausted from taking care of everyone else, but because I felt peaceful and content with my own company. I slept better that night than I had in months, but I woke up Sunday morning with a sense of anticipation mixed with dread. Reality was starting to set in. While I had been discovering the pleasure of my own company, my daughter had gotten married without me. There had been a ceremony, a reception, probably dancing and cake cutting and all the traditions I had dreamed of sharing with her. I made myself breakfast and coffee, determined to maintain the self-care routine I'd started the day before. But as I sat at my kitchen table, I couldn't stop wondering how the wedding had gone. Had anyone asked where I was? Had Sarah felt even a moment of regret about her decision? Had she noticed my absence at all? Or had Margaret's presence been enough to fill any void I might have left? Around noon, I finally turned my phone back on. The screen immediately lit up with notifications, 47 missed calls, 23 text messages and several voicemails. My heart started racing as I saw most of them were from Sarah. The text messages told a story of increasing panic. "Mom, where are you? People are asking about you. Mom, please call me back. I need to talk to you. This isn't funny anymore. You're embarrassing me. Everyone keeps asking where you are. What am I supposed to tell them? Mom, I know you're mad, but please don't ruin my wedding day. I'm sorry, okay? I made a mistake. Please just come to the reception. Mom, please. People are staring at me. They know something's wrong." The messages grew more desperate as the day had progressed, and I felt a grim satisfaction reading them. Sarah was learning what it felt like to be embarrassed, to have people ask uncomfortable questions, to realise that actions have consequences. There were also messages from Tom, my ex-husband, which surprised me. "Beverly, what the hell happened? Sarah is having a meltdown and won't tell me why you're not here. I don't know what's going on between you two, but Sarah's wedding day is not the time for this drama. Whatever fight you're having with our daughter, you need to put it aside and get down here." His messages made me laugh, actually laugh out loud. Tom, who had missed every school play, every graduation, every important moment of Sarah's childhood, was lecturing me about putting aside my feelings for Sarah's benefit. The irony was almost too perfect. Linda had sent several messages too, each one more furious than the last. "I just called the venue. They said you never showed up. Good for you, honey. Tom called me, asking where you were. I told him to ask his precious daughter. If you need me to come over and tell everyone exactly what I think of this situation, just say the word." But the most interesting messages came from people I barely knew. Guests at the wedding who apparently had my number. "Beverly, this is Pastor Williams. I'm concerned about your absence today. Please call me when you get this." "Hi, Mrs. Johnson. This is Amy from Sarah's office. We were all surprised not to see you at the ceremony. I hope everything's okay." "Beverly, this is Janet David's aunt. I wanted to let you know that several of us noticed your absence and we think it's disgraceful. That girl should be ashamed of herself." That last message stopped me cold. David's own aunt, someone from Margaret's side of the family, had noticed my absence and disapproved. What exactly had happened at that wedding? I scrolled through the voicemails, starting with the earliest ones. Sarah's voice evolved from annoyed to panicked to heartbroken over the course of the day. "Mum, this is ridiculous. Just come to the church. We can talk about this later. Mum, the ceremony's about to start. Everyone's asking where you are. Please don't do this to me. Mum, I'm sorry. Okay, I messed up. But please don't ruin my wedding because you're mad at me." The final voicemail was from late in the evening and Sarah's voice was thick with tears. "Mum, I know I hurt you. I know I was wrong. The whole day was awful because you weren't there. Everyone kept asking about you, and I had to keep making up lies about why you weren't there. Margaret kept saying you were probably being dramatic, but I know that's not true. You've never been dramatic. You've always been there for me, and when I needed you most today, you weren't there and it was my fault. Please call me back. Please let me try to fix this. I set the phone down and stared at it for a long moment. Part of me wanted to call Sarah immediately to rush over to her apartment and comfort her like I'd done so many times before when she was hurting. But a larger part of me, a part that was still tender and raw from yesterday's betrayal, wasn't ready to make everything okay just because Sarah was sorry. I called Linda instead. Beverly, I've been worried sick. How are you holding up? I'm okay, I said, and surprisingly, I meant it. Actually, I'm better than okay. Did you hear about what happened at the wedding? Tom called me around 4 o'clock, absolutely livid, Linda said with obvious glee. Apparently Sarah had some kind of breakdown during the reception when people kept asking where you were. He wanted me to track you down and drag you there to fix the situation. What did you tell him? I told him that maybe his daughter should have thought about that before she uninvited her mother from her own wedding, Linda said with satisfaction. I also may have mentioned that you weren't the one causing drama. You were the one who removed herself from a toxic situation with dignity. Good for you, I said, feeling a warm rush of gratitude for my sister's fierce loyalty. Beverly, I'm proud of you, Linda continued. I know this couldn't have been easy, but you did the right thing. That girl needed to learn that there are consequences for treating people badly, even people who love you unconditionally. After I hung up with Linda, I spent the rest of the day reflecting on the messages and calls. It was clear that my absence had created exactly the kind of drama Sarah had been so worried about avoiding. The irony wasn't lost on me in trying to prevent embarrassment by excluding me. Sarah had created a much bigger embarrassment by having to explain why her mother wasn't at her wedding. But more than that, my absence had apparently made Sarah realize what she had thrown away. For 28 years, I had been her constant, her support system, her safety net. And when the biggest day of her life arrived and I wasn't there, she finally understood what she had lost. The question now was what I was going to do about it. I took 3 full days to think before I called Sarah back. 3 days to process what had happened, to examine my own feelings, and to decide what kind of relationship I wanted to have with my daughter going forward. It wasn't an easy time. I grieved for the mother-daughter relationship I thought we'd had, and I had to accept that it had probably been more one-sided than I'd ever wanted to admit. But those 3 days also gave me clarity I'd never had before. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't frantically trying to fix someone else's problems or manage someone else's emotions. I was taking care of myself first, and it felt revolutionary. When I finally called Sarah on Wednesday evening, she answered before the first ring finished. Mum, her voice was small and uncertain like a little girl's. Hello, Sarah, I said calmly. Oh my God, Mum, I've been so worried. I thought maybe something had happened to you. I thought maybe you were in the hospital or something terrible. I'm fine, I assured her. I just needed some time to think. Mum, I'm so sorry, Sarah said, and I could hear tears in her voice. I was so wrong. I was stupid and selfish, and I ruined everything. The wedding was horrible without you there. Everyone kept asking where you were, and I had to keep lying, and I felt sick the whole time. Sarah, take a breath, I said gently. Tell me what happened. Through her tears, Sarah told me about her wedding day disaster. She described the uncomfortable questions from guests, the disappointed looks from people who had expected to see me there. She told me about Pastor Williams asking where I was during the ceremony and how she had to lie and say I was sick. She told me about David's relatives commenting on my absence, some of them openly critical of her decision to exclude me. David was so upset, Sarah continued. When he found out what I'd done, he was furious. He said he couldn't believe I would treat you that way, especially after everything you've done for me. We had a huge fight at the reception, and he said he didn't know if he could trust someone who would betray their own mother. I felt a complicated mix of emotions hearing this. I was glad David had stood up for me, but I was sorry Sarah's wedding day had been ruined by conflict. Margaret kept telling me that people would get over it, that it wasn't a big deal, Sarah went on. But it was a big deal, Mum. You not being there was the only thing anyone talked about. And the worst part was, I kept looking for you. During the ceremony, during the reception, during the cake cutting, I kept looking for your face in the crowd, and when I didn't see it, nothing felt right. Sarah, I said carefully, I need you to understand something. What you did to me wasn't just hurtful, it was cruel. You didn't just uninvite me from your wedding. You told me that I wasn't worth having there, that my presence would somehow diminish your special day. Do you understand how that felt? I do now, Sarah whispered. Mum, I was so caught up in having this perfect fancy wedding that I forgot what was really important. I forgot that you're the most important person in my life, and I let Margaret convince me that you weren't good enough for her standards. And why did you let her convince you of that? There was a long pause. Because I was embarrassed, Sarah finally admitted. I was embarrassed that we weren't as wealthy as David's family, that you worked at a diner instead of having some prestigious career, that we shopped at discount stores instead of designer boutiques. I thought if I could distance myself from all of that, I could fit in better with his family. Her honesty was painful, but necessary. Sarah, I worked at that diner to put you through college. I shopped at discount stores so you could have name brand clothes. Everything I did was for you. I know that now, Sarah said, sobbing. Mum, I threw away the most important relationship in my life because I was ashamed of the sacrifices you made for me. How sick is that? How could I be so ungrateful? I felt my own eyes filling with tears, but I wasn't ready to absolve her yet. Sarah, the relationship between us has been damaged. I don't know if we can go back to the way things were. I don't want to go back, Sarah said quickly. I want to build something better. I want to be the daughter you deserve, not the one who's ashamed of where she came from. Mum, will you please give me a chance to make this right? Over the next 2 hours, we talked about everything: her relationship with Margaret, her marriage to David, her feelings about our family's financial situation, and most importantly, what kind of relationship we wanted to have going forward. Sarah told me she had already had several conversations with David about setting boundaries with his mother. He's actually been really supportive, she said. He told me that he fell in love with me partly because of how close we were, and he was disgusted when he saw how I was treating you. She also told me she wanted to start therapy, to understand why she had been so easily manipulated and why she had been willing to sacrifice our relationship for social acceptance. I want to understand why I did this, Mum, she said. I want to make sure I never hurt you like this again. By the time we hung up, we had made plans to have lunch the following Saturday. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a beginning. The next few months were a delicate process of rebuilding trust and establishing new boundaries in our relationship. Sarah followed through on her promise to start therapy, and I decided to start going too, both individually and occasionally together, for family sessions. In therapy, I learned about codependency and how my desire to be needed by Sarah had sometimes enabled her selfish behavior. I realized that by always putting her needs before my own, I had inadvertently taught her that my needs didn't matter. It was a painful realization, but also a liberating one. I also learned about setting boundaries, something I'd never been good at. I started saying no to requests that felt unreasonable or that required me to sacrifice my own well-being. The first time I told Sarah I couldn't drop everything to help her with something non-urgent, she was surprised, but she also seemed to respect me more for having limits. Sarah, meanwhile, was working on understanding her own motivations and insecurities. She came to realize that her desire to fit in with David's family had stemmed from deeper issues about self-worth. and belonging. In one of our joint sessions, she told me, "I thought if I could become the kind of person Margaret approved of, I would finally feel like I was enough. But I realize now that I was already enough, and you had been telling me that my whole life." The process wasn't always smooth. There were setbacks and difficult conversations. Sarah had to learn to stand up to Margaret, who didn't appreciate the new boundaries Sarah was setting. David was supportive, but navigating the family dynamics was complicated and sometimes stressful for their marriage. For my part, I had to learn to trust Sarah again, and more importantly, I had to learn to trust myself. I had to believe that I deserved respect and consideration, not just from Sarah, but from everyone in my life. I also started making changes in other areas of my life. I enrolled in the painting classes I'd always wanted to take but never had time for. I joined a book club at the local library. I started dating, something I hadn't done since my divorce, and while I didn't find true love immediately, I enjoyed the experience of meeting new people and discovering that I was still attractive and interesting to others. Most significantly, I found a new job. After 20 years at the diner, I applied for a position as an administrative assistant at a local law firm. The pay was better, the hours were more regular, and the work environment was more professional and respectful. When I gave my notice at the diner, my boss was surprised that I was leaving, but I realized he had taken my loyalty for granted, just like Sarah had. 6 months after the wedding debacle, Sarah and I had developed a new kind of relationship. We saw each other regularly, but not out of obligation or guilt. We talked honestly about our feelings and expectations. Most importantly, Sarah had learned to value and respect what I had given her, rather than being embarrassed by it. The breakthrough moment came when Sarah invited me to dinner at her and David's apartment to meet some of his colleagues. When one of them made a dismissive comment about people who work in service industries, Sarah immediately spoke up. "Actually, my mother worked in a diner for 20 years to put me through college," she said firmly. "Some of the hardest working, most honourable people I know work in service industries. There's nothing shameful about honest work." The room fell silent, and I felt tears spring to my eyes. This was the daughter I had raised, the one who understood the value of hard work and sacrifice, the one who wouldn't let anyone diminish the people she loved. Later that evening, as we cleared dishes together in her kitchen, Sarah turned to me and said, "Mum, I want you to know that I tell everyone about you now. I tell them about how you worked multiple jobs to support me, how you sacrificed your own opportunities for mine, how you raised me to be independent and strong. I'm proud of you, and I'm proud to be your daughter." The relationship we rebuilt was different from the one we'd had before. It was more honest, more balanced, and more respectful. Sarah learned to value my opinions and include me in decisions that affected our relationship. I learned to maintain my own identity and interests rather than living entirely through her. Margaret remained a challenging presence in Sarah's life, but Sarah had learned to set firm boundaries with her mother-in-law. When Margaret made snide comments about me or tried to exclude me from family events, Sarah shut it down immediately. "My mother is an important part of my life," she would say. "If you can't respect her, then we have a problem." David proved to be a valuable ally in this process. He had been genuinely horrified by what Sarah had done, and he made it clear that he expected her to treat me with the respect I deserved. He often went out of his way to include me in their plans and to show appreciation for what I had done for Sarah. A year after the wedding, Sarah and David decided to have a small ceremony to renew their vows, this time with me in the front row where I belonged. It was a simple affair, nothing like the elaborate production Margaret had orchestrated, but it was infinitely more meaningful because it was based on love and respect rather than image and status. As I watched my daughter and son-in-law exchange vows again, this time with sincerity and maturity rather than fairy tale fantasies, I reflected on everything we had been through. The pain of that wedding day had been devastating, but it had also been necessary. Sometimes relationships have to break before they can be rebuilt on a stronger foundation. When Sarah asked me to say a few words at their vow renewal ceremony, I spoke about the importance of recognizing and valuing the people who love you, not just the people who can give you things. I talked about how real love sometimes means making difficult choices and standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. Love isn't just about being there for the good times, I said, looking directly at Sarah. It's about being there for each other through the hard times too. It's about choosing each other, not just when it's easy, but when it's difficult. It's about respecting each other enough to be honest, even when the truth is hard to hear. After the ceremony, Sarah pulled me aside and said, "Mum, I know I can never undo what I did to you. But I promise you I will spend the rest of my life being the daughter you deserve." I hugged her tightly and said, "Sarah, you already are." Now, looking back on that painful time, I realize it was one of the most important periods of my life, not because of the hurt it caused, but because of the growth it forced. I learned that standing up for myself doesn't make me selfish. I learned that setting boundaries doesn't mean I love people less. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to say no when someone you love is treating you badly. The relationship Sarah and I have now is built on mutual respect and genuine appreciation. She values my opinions, includes me in important decisions, and makes sure I know that I matter to her. I, in turn, have learned to maintain my own life and interests while still being a loving and supportive mother. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not going to Sarah's original wedding, if I think I should have just swallowed my pride and been the bigger person. My answer is always the same. I regret that it came to that point, but I don't regret my decision. By choosing to respect myself, I taught my daughter an invaluable lesson about how people should be treated. More importantly, I learned that lesson myself. Today, Sarah and I have a relationship based on choice rather than obligation, on respect rather than guilt. We choose to spend time together because we genuinely enjoy each other's company, not because we feel we have to. We support each other through difficulties, not out of duty, but out of love. And sometimes I think that's a much better foundation for a relationship than anything we had before. If you've made it to the end of this story, I want you to ask yourself, are there relationships in your life where you're giving more than you're receiving? Are there people who take your love and support for granted? Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for them, is to step back and let them learn to value what they're losing. Please share this story. If it resonated with you, give it a like. If it made you think about your own relationships, and subscribe to hear more real stories about family love and learning to value ourselves. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your own dignity, even when it hurt someone you loved? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, you teach people how to treat you by what you accept. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to accept nothing less than the respect you deserve.